The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the law office on the 47th floor, each drop a percussion note in the symphony of a deal closing. Marcus Thompson sat across from three attorneys whose combined billable hours could fund a small country's education budget. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m. The contracts spread before him represented the culmination of 18 months of negotiations, due diligence reports thick enough to stop bullets, and more sleepless nights than he cared to count. $920 million. That was the number typed across the top of the final page, the sum required to acquire Sky Elite Aviation in its entirety. Marcus picked up the Mont Blanc pen, its weight familiar in his palm, and signed his name in the designated spaces. The attorneys witnessed. Notary stamps came down with official thuds. Just like that, he owned an airline. Arthur Morgan, the silver-haired chief operating officer who had run Sky Elite's day-to-day operations for the past decade, extended his hand across the mahogany table. His grip was firm, but his eyes carried something Marcus recognized immediately: uncertainty about the future. Arthur had built his career in aviation. Started as a baggage handler in 1984, worked his way through every department until he sat in the executive suite. Now, a 42-year-old black man from Oakland owned the company, and Arthur didn't know if his decades of loyalty would count for anything under new ownership. Marcus shook his hand and held it a moment longer than necessary. The message was simple: I see you, and you're not going anywhere. The lead attorney cleared his throat, shuffling papers into expensive leather portfolios. The transaction was complete. Sky Elite Aviation, with its fleet of 12 Bombardier Global 7000s and 5s, its exclusive client roster of Fortune 500 executives and old money families, its premium routes between New York and San Francisco, Los Angeles, Miami, and London, now belonged to Aerotech Industries. More specifically, it belonged to the man who had founded Aerotech in a Stanford dorm room 17 years ago, with nothing but a theory about lithium-ion battery efficiency and a refusal to accept that the industry giants were right. Arthur remained seated as the attorneys filed out. The rain continued its assault on the windows. Manhattan stretched below them, a grid of lights that never truly slept. Marcus, we didn't expect you to fly commercial. Arthur's voice carried a carefully neutral tone, the kind executives perfected when speaking to new bosses whose temperaments remained unknown. We can have the G7 ready for you by 7 a.m. Full crew, catering, whatever you need for the flight to San Francisco. Marcus was already shaking his head before Arthur finished. He pulled his phone from the pocket of his jeans, unlocked it with his thumbprint, and opened the Sky Elite booking portal. The app was sleek, well-designed, exactly what you'd expect from a luxury carrier. He selected Flight 707, the 6:30 a.m. departure from JFK to SFO, and scrolled through the seat map. First class consisted of 8 seats, each priced at $8,400 for the 5-hour, 40-minute journey. He selected 1A, the most expensive seat on the aircraft, positioned at the forwardmost point of the cabin with maximum legroom and the largest window. The booking form asked for a name. Marcus typed M. Davis. Arthur watched this unfold with growing concern. Sir, if you want to inspect operations, we can arrange a full walkthrough at Teterboro. You'll see everything: maintenance logs, crew training records, customer satisfaction metrics. You don't need to. I need to see what passengers see when they don't know the owner is watching. Marcus entered his credit card information, the same Amex Black card he'd been using since Aerotech's 3rd year when revenue finally justified the annual fee. The charge went through instantly. Confirmation email arrived 3 seconds later. Mr. M. Davis, your booking is confirmed for Sky Elite Flight 707, Seat 1A. He looked up at Arthur, whose expression had shifted from concern to something approaching alarm. Don't tell anyone. Not the crew, not the gate agents, nobody. I want to see the real service standards, not the performance you put on when executives are watching. Arthur opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Sir, our service standards are consistent across all passengers. We don't provide different levels of... Marcus cut him off with a look. Arthur, I've read the complaints. I've seen the settlement payments. I know about the incidents that got swept under expensive rugs. And I know you know about them too. The older man's face went carefully blank, a mask Marcus had seen before on executives who suddenly realized the new boss had done his homework thoroughly. The due diligence process had uncovered things Sky Elite's previous ownership had tried very hard to bury. 47 formal complaints filed over 5 years, discrimination allegations, stories of passengers treated differently based on nothing more than skin color or perceived wealth. Each complaint had been quietly settled, NDAs signed, internal reviews conducted that somehow always concluded with minor policy adjustments and no terminations. Arthur, you're not fired. Marcus's voice softened slightly. But you are complicit. You saw problems and you managed them instead of fixing them. That ends today. When I land in San Francisco, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about culture change. The COO nodded slowly, the motion of a man who knew he'd been given a lifeline he didn't entirely deserve. Marcus gathered his things, laptop, phone, the leather messenger bag that had traveled with him since MIT. He checked the time. 3:15 a.m. He had roughly 3 hours before he needed to be at JFK. Enough time to shower at his Tribeca loft, change clothes, grab the carry-on bag he'd packed the night before. The $400 million Department of Defense contract signing was scheduled for 2 p.m. Pacific Time at the Presidio in San Francisco. Missing it wasn't an option. The contract would fund Aerotech's expansion into military-grade drone batteries for the next generation of autonomous surveillance aircraft. It represented 18 months of negotiations with Pentagon procurement officials, who moved at the speed of continental drift. He took the elevator down 47 floors, emerged into the lobby where a few exhausted lawyers still huddled over documents, and pushed through the revolving doors into the rain-soaked night. His driver waited at the curb in the black Tesla Model S, engine silent, wipers working overtime against the downpour. The drive to Tribeca took 11 minutes at this hour. Marcus spent them scrolling through his phone, reading the Sky Elite passenger reviews on various travel forums. 5 stars from a tech executive who praised the champagne selection. 1 star from someone complaining about being moved from their confirmed seat to accommodate a platinum member. 3 stars noting that the crew seemed dismissive when asked questions. 2 stars from a passenger who claimed to have been racially profiled during boarding. He saved screenshots of each review. The loft was dark when he entered, just the ambient glow of the city filtering through the tall windows. He didn't bother with lights. Muscle memory guided him to the bathroom where he stood under water hot enough to redden his skin, letting the tension of the all-night negotiation session drain away. He thought about his father, dead now for 6 years, who had worked 32 years as a machinist in an Oakland factory and never once flew anywhere. His mother, a retired elementary school teacher who had taken her first plane ride at age 63 when Marcus flew her first class to his PhD graduation at MIT. She had been terrified, not of flying, but of being in first class, convinced someone would realize she didn't belong and ask her to move to the back of the plane. Marcus had assured her the seat was paid for, that she had every right to be there. But she'd spent the entire flight wound tight with anxiety, speaking in whispers, apologizing to the flight attendant for asking for water. That memory lived in him like a coal that never quite cooled. He dressed in the dark gray hoodie that cost $2,800 but looked like something from Target, black jeans, white Adidas sneakers that retailed for $350 but could pass for the $60 knockoff. The hoodie was Brunello Cucinelli, made from cashmere so fine it felt like wearing clouds. But unless someone checked the nearly invisible label at the collar, they'd assume discount rack. He liked it that way. Liked moving through the world without the armor of obvious wealth, seeing how people treated him when they made assumptions based on appearance alone. He grabbed his bag, checked its contents one final time. Laptop, chargers, the folder containing printouts of the DoD contract he'd review on the plane, noise-canceling headphones, a dog-eared copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X he'd been rereading for the third time. The book fell open to a passage he'd underlined years ago. I've often reflected upon the new vistas that reading opened to me. I knew right there in prison that reading had changed forever the course of my life. Marcus had never been to prison, but he knew about locked doors all the same. The kind that didn't have bars but were just as real. The kind that closed in your face when you walked into rooms where people decided you didn't belong before you opened your mouth. His phone showed 5:47 a.m. Time to go. JFK Airport was already awake when he arrived, that strange pre-dawn energy of a place that never truly shuts down. The terminal was a river of humanity. Business travelers in wrinkled suits, clutching coffee cups. Families with small children whose internal clocks hadn't adjusted to the early hour. College students with overstuffed backpacks heading home or away. Marcus joined the line for Sky Elite's first-class check-in counter. There were 3 people ahead of him, an elderly white man in a cashmere overcoat, a blonde woman in her 40s wearing yoga pants and carrying a Birkin bag that cost more than most people's cars, and a white man in his 30s whose Patagonia vest and wireframe glasses screamed venture capitalist. The check-in agent was a woman in her mid-50s, her Sky Elite uniform pressed to military precision, her smile bright and professional as she processed each passenger with practiced efficiency. The elderly man's transaction took 90 seconds. The blonde woman's took 2 minutes because she wanted to confirm her meal preferences for the 3rd time. The venture capitalist's took 45 seconds. Then it was Marcus's turn. He approached the counter, set his bag down, and pulled out his phone to display the confirmation email. The agent's smile flickered. Not off, exactly, but it dimmed like someone had lowered the wattage. Her eyes moved from his face to his hoodie to his sneakers and back to his face. The assessment took perhaps 2 seconds, but Marcus had experienced it enough times in his life to recognize it instantly. The recalibration that happens when someone's expectations don't match what they're seeing. Checking in for Flight 707 to San Francisco. He kept his voice level, polite, the same tone he'd used with the lawyers a few hours earlier. The agent took his phone, glanced at the screen, then looked up at him with an expression that tried for professional concern, but landed closer to suspicion. "Mr. Davis, I'll need to see some identification, please." Marcus pulled out his wallet, extracted his driver's license, and placed it on the counter. California license, issued 3 months ago when he'd finally gotten around to updating his address after moving from Palo Alto to San Francisco proper. The photo showed him clean-shaven, wearing a suit, looking nothing like the man standing before her now. The agent studied the license with more attention than the small piece of plastic deserved. She typed something into her computer, frowned slightly, typed something else. "And I'll need to see the credit card you used for the booking." Marcus had not been asked for his credit card by the 3 passengers ahead of him. He knew this because he'd been standing close enough to observe their transactions in detail. He said nothing, just placed his Amex Black card on the counter next to his license. The agent picked it up, examined it front and back as if checking for signs of forgery, then ran it through a card reader even though the charge had already been processed hours ago. Her computer beeped. She frowned again. "Just one moment, Mr. Davis." She picked up a phone, turned slightly away, and had a conversation in a voice too low for Marcus to hear clearly. He caught fragments. "First-class booking," and "Want to verify?" and "Just seems unusual." Behind him, the line was growing. A man in a charcoal suit checked his watch with visible impatience. A woman with 2 small children tried to keep them from wandering off. The venture capitalist who'd already checked in stood near the gate entrance, watching the scene with the detached interest of someone observing an interesting social experiment. The agent hung up and turned back to Marcus with a smile that had gone from dimmed to completely artificial. "I apologize for the wait, Mr. Davis. We're just conducting some routine verification on your account." Routine verification that hadn't been routine for anyone else in line. "Is there a problem with my reservation?" "No problem at all, sir. It's just that this particular ticket was purchased very recently, and we want to ensure there's no fraudulent activity on your account. It's for your protection." Marcus let that sit in the air between them for a moment. The accusation was clear, even if unspoken. She thought he'd stolen a credit card or somehow accessed someone else's account, because surely a black man in a hoodie didn't have $8,400 to spend on a plane ticket. "I purchased the ticket at 3:15 this morning because I finalized my travel plans at 3:15 this morning. The charge went through without issue. My card has not been reported stolen because it's not stolen. It's mine." "Of course, sir. I'm not suggesting." "Then perhaps we can complete the check-in process?" Another phone call. This time Marcus heard more. "Supervisor," and "just want to be careful," and "you know how it is." Yes, he did know how it was. 5 minutes later, a man emerged from a door behind the counter. He wore a name tag identifying him as Brian Chen, supervisor. He was white, in his early 40s, with a sort of aggressively cheerful demeanor that suggested years of customer service training. "Mr. Davis, I apologize for any inconvenience. We just want to make sure we're providing you with the best possible service. Everything checks out with your reservation. Julie here will get you all set." Julie, the original agent, printed his boarding pass with hands that moved a fraction slower than they had for the previous passengers. She placed it on the counter along with his license and credit card. "You're all set, Mr. Davis. Boarding begins at 6:10. Have a wonderful flight." The words were correct. The tone was not. It was the voice someone uses when they've been told they have to do something they disagree with. Marcus gathered his documents and walked toward security. Behind him, he heard Julie speaking to the supervisor in a voice that wasn't quite quiet enough. "I was just being thorough. You know we've had issues with stolen cards before." The TSA checkpoint was a choreographed dance of removing shoes, extracting laptops, placing bags on conveyor belts. Marcus had been through enough airports to have the routine down to a science. He placed his messenger bag in a gray plastic bin, took off his sneakers, and walked toward the metal detector. "Random screening, please step aside, sir." The TSA agent was a woman in her 30s, heavy-set, with an expression of profound boredom that suggested she'd been working since before sunrise. She gestured toward a separate line where additional screening took place. Marcus stepped aside. He watched as the man in the charcoal suit walked through the metal detector without incident. Then the blonde woman with the Birkin bag. Then 3 more white passengers in business attire. The agent who conducted the additional screening was thorough to the point of theater. She ran her hands along his arms, down his sides, around his waistband. She opened his laptop and powered it on to verify it was actually a computer. She removed every item from his bag and examined each one individually. The Malcolm X book with its worn cover, the folder of DoD contract documents, his phone charger, a protein bar he'd packed for the flight. The laptop received special attention. She turned it over, examined the ports, ran it through the scanner a second time. It was a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro, custom configured with maxed-out specs, worth approximately $6,800. The Aerotech Industries logo was engraved on the lid, but she didn't seem to notice or care. "What do you do for work, sir?" The question was posed casually, but Marcus understood its purpose. She was trying to determine if someone who looked like him could legitimately afford the expensive electronics and the first-class ticket. "I'm in technology." "What kind of technology?" "Battery systems and energy storage." "For which company?" Marcus considered telling her, considered explaining that he owned the company, that the laptop she was examining so suspiciously was one of 50 custom units Aerotech had ordered for senior leadership, that the prototype lithium-ion cells in Aerotech's patents were currently powering drones in 12 countries and soon would power the Pentagon's next-generation surveillance fleet. Instead, he said, "Aerotech Industries, we're based in San Francisco." She nodded, unimpressed, and finally cleared him through. The entire process had taken 11 minutes. Marcus checked his watch. 6:02 a.m. The white passengers who had arrived after him had long since made it through security and were probably already at their gates. He reassembled his bag, put his shoes back on, and headed toward the Sky Elite Lounge. His boarding pass granted him access to their Platinum Lounge, a perk that came with first-class tickets. The lounge was supposedly one of Sky Elite's signature features, modeled after the private clubs of old New York. Leather armchairs, mahogany paneling, a full bar, and a menu of breakfast options prepared by a chef who'd trained at Le Bernardin. The entrance was marked by frosted glass doors etched with the Sky Elite logo. A young woman sat at a reception desk just inside, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her makeup applied with the precision of someone who'd watched a lot of YouTube tutorials. Marcus approached the desk and presented his boarding pass. The receptionist glanced at it, then looked up at him with an expression of polite confusion. "I'm sorry, sir, but this lounge is for first-class passengers only." "I am a first-class passenger. Seat 1A on flight 707 to San Francisco." She looked at the boarding pass again, this time actually reading it instead of just glancing. Her cheeks flushed slightly. "Oh, I apologize. Right this way, Mr. Davis." She stood and led him into the lounge with the stiff posture of someone deeply embarrassed, but trying to pretend nothing awkward had just happened. She gestured to the seating area where perhaps a dozen other passengers were scattered among the leather chairs and sofas. A few looked up as Marcus entered, assessed him quickly, and returned to their newspapers or phones. "Can I get you anything to start? Coffee, juice, champagne?" "Coffee would be great, black." She nodded and disappeared toward the bar area. Marcus selected a chair near the window overlooking the tarmac. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink. On the runway, planes taxied in precise choreography, their wings catching the early light. He pulled out his phone and opened his email. 43 new messages since 3 a.m. Most were automated notifications about the Sky Elite acquisition finalizing. A few were from his executive team at Aerotech, congratulating him on the purchase. One was from his mother. "I saw the news. Your father would be so proud. Be safe. Love you." He typed a quick reply. "Love you too. We'll call when I land." The coffee arrived in a pristine white cup on a matching saucer. The receptionist set it down with exaggerated care, as if afraid any sudden movement might trigger another embarrassing mistake. "Is there anything else I can get for you, Mr. Davis?" "No, thank you." She retreated. Marcus sipped the coffee. It was excellent, the kind of carefully sourced Ethiopian blend that cost $40 per pound. He could taste notes of blueberry and dark chocolate, exactly the flavor profile the roaster had promised. Around him, the lounge gradually filled with more first-class passengers. Two men in their 60s, both white, both wearing suits that probably cost what Marcus paid for his entire hoodie and jeans outfit. A woman in her 40s with perfect highlights and a Hermes scarf. A younger couple who looked like honeymooners, holding hands and whispering to each other. Marcus overheard fragments of conversation. The two older men were discussing a merger, throwing around numbers in the hundreds of millions, with the casual tone of people for whom such figures were routine. The woman with the Hermes scarf was on her phone. "Tell them if they want the Southampton house for August, they need to commit by Friday, or I'm opening it up to other renters." And then from a trio of men seated near the bar, a comment that carried just far enough. Did they lower the standards for this lounge or something? Laughter, quickly suppressed. Marcus didn't look up. He'd learned long ago that reacting to such comments only gave them power. He continued scrolling through his email, his expression neutral, his coffee cooling in his hand. "I mean, I'm all for diversity, but this is supposed to be an exclusive space." More laughter, less suppressed this time. One of them glanced in Marcus's direction, not quite making eye contact, but clearly indicating who they were discussing. Probably an athlete, or maybe a rapper. They always try to buy their way into places they don't understand. The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread across the lounge. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The honeymooners stopped whispering. The woman with the Hermes scarf looked over, frowned, and returned to her phone call. Marcus set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. He could feel his heart rate elevating, that familiar heat rising in his chest that accompanied moments like this. He had options. He could confront them, explain exactly who he was, and watch their faces drain of color. He could ignore them completely, deny them even the satisfaction of a reaction. He could leave the lounge and wait at the gate. Instead, he did something else. He pulled out his phone, opened the voice memo app, and pressed record. He placed the phone face down on the armrest of his chair, the microphone pointed toward the bar area. Then he went back to his email, his posture relaxed, his expression unchanged. The trio at the bar continued their conversation, emboldened by what they interpreted as his lack of response. My kid wanted to apply to Stanford, but I told him don't bother. These days, they're only taking, diversity admits. Actual qualified students don't stand a chance. That's why I send my kids private. You want them to actually learn something, you can't rely on public schools anymore. Too much focus on making sure nobody's feelings get hurt. Exactly. Merit doesn't matter anymore. It's all about checking boxes. 23 seconds of recorded audio. Marcus stopped the recording, uploaded it to his secure cloud storage, and made a mental note of the timestamp. Evidence, should he ever need it, of the atmosphere that pervaded Sky Elite's premium spaces. The announcement for Flight 707 came at 6:08 a.m. We now welcome our first-class passengers for boarding at Gate 47. Marcus gathered his belongings and walked out of the lounge. Behind him, the trio at the bar was still talking, their voices fading as he moved down the concourse. He didn't look back. Gate 47 was crowded with economy passengers hoping for an upgrade, families trying to keep small children entertained, business travelers typing frantically on laptops balanced on their knees. The first-class boarding lane was nearly empty, just Marcus and the two older men from the lounge, still deep in discussion about their merger. The gate agent was a young black woman, mid-20s, with neat braids and a name tag reading Shanice. She took his boarding pass, scanned it, and looked up with a smile that seemed genuinely warm. Welcome aboard, Mr. Davis. You're in 1A today. Enjoy your flight. Thank you. It was such a small thing, that moment of normal courtesy. But after the previous hour, it felt like cool water on burned skin. Marcus walked down the jetway and into the aircraft. The Bombardier Global 7500 was a masterpiece of aviation engineering. Composite airframe, Rolls-Royce engines capable of cruising at Mach 0, 925. Range sufficient to fly from New York to Hong Kong without refueling. The first-class cabin was configured with 8 seats in a 1-to-1 layout, each seat essentially a private suite with a door that could close for complete privacy. The leather was the color of cream, the wood accents were genuine walnut, and the ambient lighting was set to a soft blue that suggested twilight. Seat 1A was everything the price promised. Marcus settled into it, stowed his bag in the overhead compartment, and accepted a glass of champagne from the flight attendant who materialized with practiced grace. She was a black woman, late 20s, slender, with her hair pulled back in a bun and an expression that somehow managed to be both professional and weary. Her name tag read, Jessica Williams. Good morning, Mr. Davis. Can I get you anything else to start? We have fresh orange juice, sparkling water, or if you'd prefer, I can prepare an espresso. Sparkling water with lime would be perfect. Thank you, Jessica. Something in her posture relaxed slightly when he used her name, a small acknowledgement that he saw her as a person, not just a service provider. Of course, and if you need anything during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask. You look tired. Long night? 72-hour work week. Just need some quiet and maybe a few hours of sleep. I'll make sure you get both. Dimming the cabin lights now. She disappeared toward the galley. Marcus reclined his seat slightly and looked out the window. The tarmac was a ballet of baggage carts, fuel trucks, and ground crew members in reflective vests. Beyond the airport perimeter, Queens stretched toward the horizon, a tapestry of neighborhoods where people were waking up to begin their days. He thought about his mother again, about that first flight she'd taken, about how she'd gripped the armrest during takeoff with enough force to make her knuckles white. He'd asked her later why she'd been so scared, and she'd looked at him with an expression he'd never quite been able to categorize, somewhere between sadness and resignation. Because places like this weren't made for people like us, baby. And when you're somewhere you're not supposed to be, you just wait for someone to notice and send you back where you belong. He'd been furious at that answer, furious that she'd internalized that message so deeply. He'd promised her then that he would build something, create something, become someone who could walk into any space and belong by right of achievement and merit. And here he was, 15 years later, sitting in seat 1A of an aircraft he owned, dressed like someone who'd slept in a bus station, documenting the ways his own company treated people who looked like him when they didn't know who he was watching. The champagne was excellent. Dom Perignon, 2012 vintage, served at exactly the right temperature in a crystal flute. Marcus took a small sip and set it aside. He needed to stay sharp, needed to observe everything without the fog of alcohol dulling his perceptions. More passengers were boarding now. The two older men from the lounge took seats 2A and 2D across the aisle from each other so they could continue their conversation. A woman in her 50s with severe cheekbones and a Chanel suit claimed 3A. A man who looked like a lawyer or accountant, 30s, already on his phone, settled into 4A, and then came the disruption that would change everything. Two men entered the cabin, one in his late 50s wearing a pilot's uniform with captain stripes on the epaulets, the other in his late 40s wearing a custom suit that screamed wealth and entitlement. They were laughing, that easy camaraderie of people who'd known each other for years. The pilot was tall, silver-haired, with a kind of weathered handsomeness that suggested he'd spent his life outdoors or at high altitude. His uniform was pressed to perfection, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. The man in the suit was shorter, stockier, already red-faced despite the early hour, carrying the energy of someone who'd started drinking before most people had their morning coffee. Marcus watched them approach, a prickle of unease starting at the base of his spine. The pilot stopped at the entrance to the first-class cabin and surveyed the passengers with the proprietary air of someone who considered this his domain. His eyes swept past the elderly men, past the woman in Chanel, past the lawyer, and landed on Marcus. The expression that crossed his face was minute but unmistakable. Surprise mixed with disapproval, quickly masked by professional neutrality. The man in the suit clapped the pilot on the shoulder, laughing at some unheard joke. He was Gregory Blackwell, Marcus knew, though they'd never met, one of Sky Elite's platinum members, a hedge fund manager whose firm, Blackwell Capital, managed approximately $2.8 billion in assets. Marcus knew this because Aerotech Industries had $340 million invested with Blackwell Capital, part of a diversified portfolio strategy his CFO had implemented 3 years ago. The pilot, Captain Richard Hayes, according to the name tag on his uniform, walked toward the cockpit, but not before stopping next to Jessica Williams, who had just emerged from the galley with Marcus's sparkling water. Jessica. His voice was low but carried authority, the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Captain, who authorized the passenger in 1A? Jessica's face went carefully neutral, a mask Marcus recognized from his own repertoire of professional expressions. Mr. Davis is a confirmed first-class passenger, Captain. Seat 1A was his selection at time of booking. Captain Hayes glanced at Marcus again, then back to Jessica. When did he book? This morning, 3:15 a.m. The reservation has been fully paid. The captain's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He opened his mouth as if to say something, reconsidered, and nodded curtly before continuing toward the cockpit. Jessica brought Marcus his water. Her hands, he noticed, were trembling slightly. Thank you, Jessica. She managed a small smile that didn't reach her eyes, then retreated to the galley. Marcus took a slow breath. The unease had crystallized into something more specific now. Recognition. He'd seen that look before, that particular assessment followed by disapproval. He knew exactly what Captain Hayes had been thinking when he saw a black man in a hoodie occupying the most expensive seat on his aircraft. The question was, what Hayes would do about it. Gregory Blackwell had taken a seat near the back of the first-class cabin in 7A and was already on his phone conducting what sounded like a business call at a volume designed to ensure everyone knew he was important. Sell the futures. I don't care what the analyst report says. Sell them by close of market today or you're fired. Marcus closed his eyes and activated the noise-canceling feature on his headphones. The world went mercifully quiet. He pulled out his laptop, opened the folder containing the Department of Defense contract, and began to review the final terms. The document was 247 pages of legal language, technical specifications, delivery schedules, and penalty clauses for non-performance. He'd read it 11 times already, but wanted to be absolutely certain he understood every clause before signing. 10 minutes later, the cockpit door opened again. Captain Hayes emerged, walked directly to seat 1A, and stopped. Marcus looked up, removing one side of his headphones. "Sir, I'm afraid there's been a mistake with your booking." His tone was polite but firm, the voice of authority that brooked no argument. "A mistake? I have my boarding pass right here." Marcus pulled up the digital boarding pass on his phone and held it out. Hayes didn't look at it. "Not that kind of mistake. This seat, seat 1A, is technically reserved for our platinum status members. It's an operational requirement for weight and balance on this specific flight path." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd designed battery systems for aircraft. He understood the physics of flight better than most pilots. He knew with absolute certainty that the Bombardier Global 7500's center of gravity calculations did not require specific passenger placement unless you were dealing with cargo imbalances or unusual fuel loads. Weight and balance. He let the words hang in the air, giving Hayes a chance to recognize the absurdity of the claim. That's correct. The Global 7500 has very specific requirements for passenger distribution. Marcus set down his laptop with exaggerated care. "Captain, the Global 7500 has a maximum takeoff weight of 114,850 pounds. The difference in center of gravity between a 160-pound passenger in seat 1A versus seat 4D would be approximately 0.2% of the total aircraft weight, well within the certified CG envelope. The aircraft's flight management system would compensate automatically with trim adjustments that would be imperceptible to passengers." Hayes's face went rigid. The fact that Marcus knew the aircraft specifications clearly hadn't been part of his expected script. "Sir, I appreciate your interest in aviation, but I'm the captain of this aircraft. I have 30 years of experience, and I'm telling you that for safety reasons, you need to move to seat 4D. Marcus held his gaze. "I paid $8,400 for this specific seat, Captain Hayes. I selected it during booking. I was confirmed in this seat. Unless there is a genuine safety issue that you can document in writing, I'm not moving." Behind them, the cabin had gone very quiet. The two elderly businessmen had stopped their merger discussion. The woman in Chanel was watching with undisguised interest. Even Gregory Blackwell had paused his phone call. Hayes leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, but not enough to prevent the nearest passengers from hearing. "Look, Mr. Davis, let's not make this difficult. We have a VIP guest on board today who requires the workspace provided by seat 1A. As captain of this vessel, I have the authority to reassign seating for the safety and comfort of all passengers. Now, please gather your belongings." The mask had slipped. The weight and balance excuse had been abandoned. Now it was about VIP guests and workspace requirements and captain's authority. Marcus understood in that moment with perfect clarity what was happening. Captain Hayes had made a promise to Gregory Blackwell, probably as they'd walked onto the aircraft together. Probably something like, "Don't worry, Greg, I'll get you 1A." And now Hayes was confronting the inconvenient reality that 1A was occupied by someone he'd assumed would be easy to move, someone who, based solely on appearance, Hayes had judged wouldn't push back. "You're ordering me to move." Marcus kept his voice level, conversational, but loud enough that there would be witnesses to this exchange. Not for safety, not for weight and balance, but because you want to give my paid seat to your friend. Hayes's neck flushed red above his collar. "I am ordering you to move because I'm the captain, and on this aircraft, what I say is law. If you don't comply, I will have you removed from the flight by airport security for non-compliance with crew instructions. Is that what you want? To be escorted off this plane in front of everyone?" Behind Marcus, Gregory Blackwell's voice cut through the tension. "Come on, buddy, don't be difficult. Just move back a few rows. It's not that big a deal." Marcus turned slightly to look at Blackwell. The hedge fund manager was standing now, having abandoned his phone call to watch the confrontation. His face carried the entitled smugness of someone who'd never been told no by people he considered service workers. "I'm not your buddy, and it is a big deal when a captain fabricates safety concerns to justify discrimination." The word landed like a grenade. Discrimination? Hayes's voice rose slightly, genuine anger replacing the forced courtesy. "I'm enforcing cabin protocols. This has nothing to do with—" "Then explain to me why you didn't check anyone else's ticket. Explain why you didn't ask the gentleman in 2A if he was a platinum member. Explain why the weight and balance requirements somehow only apply to my seat." "I don't have to explain my decisions to you. Actually, as a paying passenger, you do. And as the person being discriminated against based on your assumptions about who belongs in this cabin, I'm not moving." The standoff stretched. Hayes's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Marcus could see the calculation happening behind the pilot's eyes. How far could he push this without creating a scene that would become a problem later? Jessica Williams appeared from the galley, her face pale. "Captain, we need to finish pre-flight. We're scheduled for pushback in 4 minutes. Hayes ignored her, his attention locked on Marcus. "Final warning, Mr. Davis. Move to seat 4D, or I will call security." Marcus reached into his messenger bag and pulled out his phone. He unlocked it, opened his contacts, and scrolled to a name. Arthur Morgan, COO, Sky Elite Aviation. His thumb hovered over the call button. One call, and this would end immediately. Arthur would confirm Marcus's identity, and Hayes would realize the magnitude of his mistake. The humiliation would be instant and complete. But Marcus didn't press call. Not yet. Because ending it now would only address this single incident. It wouldn't expose the system that allowed Hayes to behave this way, with confidence that he'd face no consequences. It wouldn't reveal how many other passengers had been treated like this, how many had simply complied because they didn't have the resources to fight back. If Marcus revealed himself now, Hayes would learn that he'd misjudged this particular passenger's power. But he wouldn't learn that his behavior itself was wrong. He'd just learn to be more careful about which passengers he tried to bully. No, Marcus needed Hayes to dig deeper, needed him to commit fully to this course of action, needed a record, witnesses, evidence of the systemic rot that $2.3 million in quiet settlements had papered over for 5 years. He lowered his phone and looked directly at Captain Hayes. "Call security." "I'll wait." Captain Hayes pulled his phone from his uniform pocket with the deliberate slowness of a gunfighter drawing his weapon. He kept his eyes locked on Marcus as he dialed, the gesture designed to communicate absolute confidence in the righteousness of his position. The phone rang twice before someone answered. "This is Captain Hayes on Flight 707. I need airport security at Gate 47 immediately. I have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions." "Yes, I'll wait here until they arrive." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Around them, the cabin had transformed into a theater, every passenger now a spectator to a drama they hadn't asked to witness. The two elderly businessmen exchanged glances that carried decades of boardroom experience reading power dynamics. The woman in Chanel had her phone out, not quite recording, but positioned for it. The lawyer in 4A had stopped pretending to work and was watching with the focused attention of someone mentally cataloging details for future reference. Gregory Blackwell settled back into his seat with visible satisfaction, like a man who'd just won a hand of poker through sheer force of will, rather than the quality of his cards. Jessica Williams stood frozen near the galley, her professional mask finally cracking to reveal something closer to horror. She looked at Marcus, then at Hayes, then back to Marcus, and in that sequence of glances, he could read an entire history. How many times had she watched this exact scene play out? How many passengers had she seen humiliated, moved, removed, because they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of who belonged in premium cabins? The cockpit door opened, and a younger man emerged, late 20s or early 30s, wearing the uniform of a first officer. His name tag read, Daniel Brooks. He had the eager, uncertain energy of someone still early enough in his career to believe the rules would be applied fairly if he just followed them correctly. "Captain, we're past our departure window. Tower is asking for our status." Hayes didn't turn around. "Tell them we have a passenger situation. It'll be resolved shortly." Daniel's eyes found Marcus, took in the scene, and something uncomfortable flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or shame. He opened his mouth as if to speak, reconsidered, and retreated to the cockpit without another word. The coward's retreat. Marcus had seen it before, that moment when someone knew something was wrong, but decided their own comfort mattered more than someone else's dignity. Daniel Brooks would go home tonight and perhaps feel vaguely guilty about what he'd witnessed. Might even mention it to a girlfriend or roommate as evidence of how complicated these situations were, how he'd wanted to say something, but it wasn't his place, and really, what could he have done? Exactly nothing, apparently. The minutes stretched. Marcus remained in his seat, hands folded calmly in his lap, his breathing steady and controlled. He'd learned this stillness through necessity over the years, in boardrooms where venture capitalists questioned his projections with a skepticism they didn't apply to white founders, in faculty meetings at MIT where professors assumed he was a student who'd wandered into the wrong room, in countless spaces where his presence was treated as provisional until he proved otherwise. Hayes stood in the aisle like a sentinel, arms crossed, radiating the kind of authority that came from 30 years of being called captain and having people snap to attention. He seemed genuinely confident that security would arrive, remove Marcus, and validate his decision in front of all these witnesses. That confidence, Marcus suspected, was born from precedent. Hayes had probably done this before and faced no consequences. That was about to change. The other first-class passengers were starting to shift in their seats, the initial drama giving way to impatience. The elderly businessman in 2A checked his Rolex and muttered something to his companion about missing their connection in San Francisco. The woman in Chanel sighed with the particular exasperation of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted when she wanted it. "Excuse me, Captain, but how long is this going to take? Some of us have actual business to conduct." Her voice carried the crystalline edge of old money, the accent that came from prep schools and summer homes in the Hamptons. Hayes turned to her with a smile that managed to be apologetic and reassuring simultaneously. "Just a few more minutes, ma'am. I apologize for the inconvenience. We'll have you in the air shortly." The disparity in tone was remarkable. To her, Hayes was courtesy itself. To Marcus, he'd been barely controlled hostility, masked by procedural language. The difference was instructive. Two TSA officers appeared at the cabin entrance, a man in his mid-40s with a gut that strained against his uniform shirt, and a younger man, early 30s, with the rigid posture of someone who lifted weights religiously and wanted everyone to know it. The older officer was Dale Cooper, according to his badge. The younger was Jake Barnes. They surveyed the cabin with a practiced assessment of people who'd responded to these calls 1,000 times. Their eyes moved past the elderly businessman, past the woman in Chanel, past the lawyer, and landed on Marcus. Of course they did. The calculation was instant and automatic. White captain in a crisp uniform pointing at a black man in a hoodie. The math was simple. "What's the situation, Captain?" Cooper's voice was professionally neutral, but his body language told a different story. He'd already decided who the problem was before anyone spoke. Hayes gestured toward Marcus with the air of a man presenting evidence. "This passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions. I've asked him multiple times to move to a different seat for safety reasons. He's been argumentative and disruptive." Marcus felt a spike of anger at the word disruptive. He'd been sitting quietly in his paid seat, bothering no one, until Hayes had created this confrontation. But he kept his expression neutral, his voice calm. "Officers, I have my boarding pass for seat 1A. I paid for this seat. Captain Hayes asked me to move because he wants to give my seat to another passenger. When I declined, he fabricated a safety concern about weight and balance." Cooper glanced at Barnes, a quick look that communicated volumes. Here we go again, another one who thinks he knows better than the crew. "Sir, the captain has authority over this aircraft. If he's asking you to move for safety reasons, you need to comply." "The safety claim is false. The Bombardier Global 7500 doesn't require specific passenger placement for center of gravity, unless you're dealing with unusual cargo loads." Captain Hayes admitted this is actually about accommodating a VIP passenger, not safety. Barnes stepped forward, his hand drifting toward the cuffs on his belt in a gesture that was probably unconscious, but unmistakably threatening. "Sir, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice." Marcus looked at Jessica, who was now openly distressed, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the galley counter. He looked at Daniel Brooks, visible through the open cockpit door, staring straight ahead at the instrument panel as if intensely interested in pre-flight checks. He looked at the other passengers, some uncomfortable, some impatient, none intervening. And he looked at Trevor Johnson, a 19-year-old black kid in seat 6A who'd boarded so quietly Marcus hadn't noticed him until now. Trevor had his phone out, held low but clearly recording. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Marcus saw in the kid's expression something he recognized. Fury mixed with helplessness. The rage of watching something unjust unfold and knowing that speaking up would likely make it worse. Marcus gave Trevor the smallest nod. "Keep recording." Then he turned back to Cooper and Barnes. "I'll leave voluntarily. There's no need for—" Cooper grabbed Marcus's arm before he'd finished the sentence, his grip tight enough to hurt. Barnes moved to the other side, reaching for Marcus's other arm. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. I just said I'd leave voluntarily. There's no need to." Barnes pulled out handcuffs, the metal glinting under the cabin lights. The click as they opened seemed impossibly loud in the confined space. "You're resisting." Marcus's voice rose slightly, not quite a shout, but loud enough that every passenger could hear clearly. "I am not resisting. I have not touched either of you. I stated I would deplane voluntarily." Cooper twisted Marcus's arm behind his back with more force than necessary. The angle was wrong, deliberately painful, designed to establish dominance. Marcus felt the strain in his shoulder joint, a bright line of discomfort that threatened to become genuine injury if the pressure increased. The handcuffs went on. Plastic flex cuffs, not metal, but they bit into his wrists with sharp efficiency. Barnes pulled them tight, far tighter than necessary, and Marcus felt his fingers start to tingle as circulation was compressed. "The cuffs are too tight. You're cutting off circulation to my hands. Should have thought about that before you decided to be difficult." Barnes's voice carried satisfaction, the tone of someone enjoying the exercise of power over someone he'd decided deserved it. Cooper pulled Marcus from his seat. The motion was rough, without any consideration for the confined space or the fact that Marcus's hands were secured behind his back and couldn't be used for balance. Marcus stumbled, caught himself against the armrest, and then Cooper yanked him upright again. His temple connected with the edge of the armrest as Cooper pulled. Not hard enough to knock him unconscious, but hard enough that bright pain exploded across the left side of his head. He tasted copper immediately, that distinctive flavor of blood, and felt warmth spreading down from his temple toward his jaw. Jessica's voice cut through the cabin, high and tight with distress. "Stop! He's bleeding! You're hurting him!" Hayes' response was immediate and harsh. "Stay out of this, Jessica. This is a security matter." The lawyer in 4A had his phone out now, recording openly. So did the woman in Chanel. The elderly businessman in 2A looked nauseated, like he wanted to be anywhere else but couldn't quite bring himself to leave his seat. His companion had gone very still, his face carefully blank. Gregory Blackwell was smiling. Cooper and Barnes dragged Marcus down the aisle, not walked him, not escorted him, but dragged him, their hands tight on his arms, the pace deliberately faster than he could match given the awkward position and the confined space. His shoulders screamed in protest. The blood from his temple was flowing freely now, warm and wet against his skin, and he could feel it soaking into the collar of his expensive hoodie. The pain was significant but manageable. What hurt more was the humiliation. The spectacle of being hauled through the cabin like a criminal while other passengers watched and documented and did nothing. He kept his face as composed as possible, knowing the videos would be dissected later, knowing that any display of emotion would be weaponized against him. They passed Trevor, whose phone was definitely recording, his young face twisted with an anger that looked on the verge of tears. They passed the other economy passengers who'd watched the whole thing unfold, their expressions ranging from shock to discomfort to carefully maintained neutrality. They dragged him through the jet bridge, where the gate agent, Shanice, stood with her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. They hauled him into the terminal, where early morning travelers stopped to stare, where parents pulled their children closer, where the scene created ripples of attention spreading outward like a stone thrown in still water. Cooper and Barnes brought Marcus to a small security office near the gate area. The room was windowless, fluorescent lit, furnished with a metal desk and 3 plastic chairs. They shoved him into one of the chairs hard enough that he had to catch himself with his legs to avoid falling. "You're going to sit here until NYPD arrives to process you for interfering with a flight crew. That's a federal offense. You're looking at serious jail time." Barnes seemed to relish delivering this information, standing over Marcus with his arms crossed, the posture of dominance. "I did not interfere with the flight crew. I was removed from my paid seat for refusing to comply with a discriminatory order." Cooper snorted, a sound of pure derision. "Yeah, everyone who gets arrested claims discrimination. It's always someone else's fault, never their own." Marcus looked up at him, blood still seeping from his temple, and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Not rage exactly. Rage was hot and reactive. This was colder, more patient. This was the clarity that came from absolute certainty about what needed to happen next. "Officer Cooper, I'm going to remember your name. I suggest you remember mine. Dr. Marcus Thompson. Thompson, Davis, whatever. You can tell it to the judge." Barnes checked his watch with exaggerated impatience. "We've got 3 other calls waiting. NYPD is backed up this morning. You're going to be sitting here for a while." "Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to play lawyer with the captain." They left, closing the door behind them. The lock clicked with mechanical finality. Marcus sat in the plastic chair, his hands secured behind his back, his temple throbbing with each heartbeat, and took inventory. The flex cuffs had cut deep enough into his wrists that he could feel blood seeping around the plastic. His left shoulder was going to need ice, possibly physical therapy if the strain was bad enough. The cut on his temple was still bleeding, warm liquid tracking down his face and dripping onto his hoodie, each drop a small, dark stain spreading through the expensive fabric. He tested the cuffs experimentally. They were tight, professionally applied, not something he could slip out of without tools or causing himself serious injury. His fingers were starting to go numb, the tingling sensation spreading up toward his palms. The room had a clock on the wall, one of those industrial models with a red second hand that swept around the face with metronomic precision. 6:37 a.m. His flight had been scheduled to depart at 6:30, By now, they'd probably pushed back from the gate, were perhaps already taxiing toward the runway. Captain Hayes was probably feeling quite satisfied with himself, having removed the problem passenger and cleared the way for Gregory Blackwell to take the seat he wanted. Marcus looked around the room with the careful attention of someone cataloging details for future reference. Standard office setup, nothing remarkable, but mounted in the upper corner near the ceiling was a small black dome that indicated a security camera. The red LED beneath it showed it was active, recording. Good. He turned his face toward the camera, making sure the blood on his temple was clearly visible. Then he spoke directly to it, his voice calm and measured despite the circumstances. My name is Dr. Marcus Thompson. I am the founder and CEO of Aerotech Industries. I am also, as of 3 a.m. this morning, the sole owner of Sky Elite Aviation, the airline from which I was just forcibly removed. I was pulled from my paid first-class seat by Captain Richard Hayes because he wanted to give that seat to a personal friend, Gregory Blackwell. When I refused to move, Hayes fabricated a safety concern. When that didn't work, he called airport security. Officers Cooper and Barnes applied restraints with excessive force, causing the injury you can see on my temple. I did not resist. I offered to deplane voluntarily. I am documenting this for the record. The camera stared back at him, its LED blinking steadily, recording every word into whatever digital storage system airport security maintained. Marcus carefully twisted his body to extract his phone from his jeans pocket, a maneuver made difficult by the handcuffs and his injured shoulder. It took 3 attempts, his fingers barely responsive from the compressed circulation, but he finally managed to work the phone free. Unlocking it was another challenge. The facial recognition didn't work from this angle, and with blood on his face. He had to twist the phone around, input his passcode with numb fingers that barely registered the screen's feedback. 2 failed attempts before he got it right. The phone unlocked. 6:39 a.m. 42 unread emails, most of them automated notifications. 3 text messages, including one from his mother. Safe travels, baby. He opened his contacts and scrolled to Arthur Morgan. The phone rang 4 times before Arthur answered, his voice thick with sleep. Dr. Thompson, is everything all right? Marcus kept his voice level, professional, despite the blood still dripping from his temple onto his shoulder. Arthur, I need you to listen carefully. I'm at JFK in an airport security holding room. I was forcibly removed from Flight 707 by TSA officers acting on Captain Hayes' orders. I'm currently in handcuffs and bleeding from a head injury. I need you to immediately contact the FAA and ground that flight. I don't care if it's already in the air. Get it turned around and back to the gate. There was a long pause on the other end, the kind of silence that happens when someone's brain is trying to process information that doesn't make sense. Sir, I don't understand. You were removed from your own... Hayes doesn't know who I am. I booked under M. Davis. He saw a black man in a hoodie and decided I didn't belong in first class. When I refused to move, he had me arrested. The plane cannot be allowed to take off. I want Hayes, the officers who injured me, and every person who witnessed this incident available when I get out of this room. Another pause, shorter this time. When Arthur spoke again, his voice had shifted from confused to something approaching panic. I'll call the tower immediately. And, sir, I'm calling our legal team. Don't say anything else to anyone until they arrive. Too late for that. I've already given a statement to the security camera in this room. Just ground the plane, Arthur. And have Director Bradford from the FAA standing by. This isn't just about one captain's misconduct. This is about systemic failures in your company that I'm about to expose in detail. He ended the call and immediately opened his email. His fingers were almost completely numb now, the flex cuffs having done their work thoroughly, but he managed to navigate to his contacts and pull up the email addresses for his executive team at Aerotech. The email he composed was brief. Update: Sky Elite acquisition complications. Currently detained at JFK after being forcibly removed from flight. Minor injuries. Situation being resolved. DoD contract signing may need to be rescheduled. Will advise shortly. He hit send and watched the little progress bar confirm delivery. Then he opened his text messages and sent one to his mother. Small delay with flight. Everything fine. We'll call later. Love you. The lie was necessary. His mother had enough stress in her life without knowing her son was sitting in a security office with his hands cuffed behind his back and blood on his face. He'd tell her the truth eventually, but not until it was resolved and he could frame it in a way that wouldn't send her blood pressure through the ceiling. The door opened. Marcus looked up expecting NYPD, but instead saw a man in a TSA supervisor uniform, 50s, white, with the weary expression of someone who'd been woken up early to deal with a problem he hadn't created. Mr. Thompson? The use of his actual name was interesting. Either they'd run his ID through the system and gotten a hit, or Arthur had already started making calls that were having effects. Dr. Thompson. The supervisor winced slightly at the correction. Dr. Thompson, I'm Bill Henderson, TSA supervisor for this terminal. I've just received a call from our regional director. There seems to be some confusion about this incident. Marcus shifted in his chair, sending fresh pain shooting through his shoulder. No confusion on my end. I was removed from my paid seat by a captain who fabricated safety concerns to justify his discrimination. When I refused to comply with an unlawful order, I was assaulted by your officers. The blood on my face and the restraints cutting off circulation to my hands are not confused about anything. Henderson looked genuinely uncomfortable now, his eyes dropping to the blood-stained hoodie. Sir, I'm going to remove those restraints and get you medical attention. And I need to inform you that Flight 707 has been ordered to return to the gate by the FAA. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction at that news, but kept his expression neutral. I also need to tell you that there are currently 6 black SUVs in the secure area behind the gate, and a gentleman named Arthur Morgan is requesting immediate access to this facility, along with what appears to be most of Sky Elite's board of directors. Now, Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile, though it pulled at the cut on his temple and sent fresh blood seeping down his jaw. You should let them in. Henderson pulled a multi-tool from his belt and carefully cut the flex cuffs. The relief was immediate and agonizing simultaneously, blood rushing back into Marcus's hands with a pins and needles sensation that made him grit his teeth. He brought his hands around slowly, his shoulder protesting the movement, and looked at his wrists. Deep red welts circled them, some areas where the plastic had cut through skin entirely, little crescents of broken flesh that would definitely scar. Henderson was staring at the injuries with an expression approaching horror. Dr. Thompson, I apologize. This should not have happened. Cooper and Barnes will be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Not good enough. They assaulted me. I want criminal charges filed, not administrative leave. I understand, and that's absolutely your right. I'm just informing you of our immediate internal response. Who else was on that flight recording what happened? Henderson pulled out a tablet and scrolled through what looked like a passenger manifest. We've identified at least 4 passengers who were recording video. We've requested voluntary copies for our investigation. I want copies of all security footage as well. From the check-in counter, the TSA checkpoint, the lounge, the gate area, and this room. Every camera that captured any part of my experience today. I'll make sure legal coordinates with your attorneys. Good. Now, I need you to understand something clearly. This isn't just about what happened to me this morning. I own Sky Elite Aviation as of 3 a.m. today. What your officers did was assault the chairman of the board. What Captain Hayes did was discriminate against his own employer. And what I'm about to do is tear apart every policy, every procedure, every internal culture that made them confident they could treat a passenger this way without consequences. Henderson's face had gone from uncomfortable to pale. Sir, I truly apologize. If there's anything I can do, yes, get me a medical kit, some water, and then get out of my way. The TSA supervisor left quickly, returning 3 minutes later with a first aid kit and 2 bottles of water. A young EMT followed him, a woman in her 20s, who took one look at Marcus's temple and immediately opened her kit. "Sir, that needs stitches. I can't do that here. You need to go to the ER. "How many stitches?" She examined the wound carefully, her touch professional and gentle. "Probably 3, maybe 4. It's not deep enough to be dangerous, but it's definitely going to scar without proper closure. Butterfly bandages will have to do for now. I have a contract to sign in San Francisco in 7 hours. The ER can wait." She looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his expression convinced her not to. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic that stung fiercely, applied butterfly closure strips, and covered the whole thing with a large bandage. "You're going to have a significant bruise. The swelling will get worse over the next few hours. Ice would help." "I'll manage." She packed up her kit and left, casting one more concerned glance at him before closing the door. Marcus stood slowly, testing his balance and his shoulders' range of motion. Everything hurt, but nothing seemed seriously damaged. He pulled out his phone and took a selfie, making sure the bandage on his temple was clearly visible, the bloodstains on his hoodie prominent. Then he took photos of his wrists, the welts and cuts documented in high resolution. Evidence. All of it carefully preserved. The door opened again, and Arthur Morgan rushed in, followed by 5 people Marcus recognized from the due diligence documents. The Sky Elite Board of Directors who'd negotiated the sale. Behind them, moving with the careful authority of federal oversight, came Director James Bradford of the FAA, a man in his late 50s whose expression suggested he'd seen enough aviation incidents to be perpetually disappointed in humanity. Arthur stopped short when he saw Marcus's face, the bandage, the blood-stained clothing. Jesus Christ. His voice was barely a whisper. Marcus walked past him toward the door. "Get me to flight 707. Now." The procession moved through the terminal like a funeral cortege. Marcus at the front, Arthur and the board members flanking him, Director Bradford bringing up the rear, and behind them, Henderson and what looked like half the airport's senior security staff. Travelers stopped to stare. Some recognized the blood, the bandage, the odd formality of the group. A few started taking pictures or video. Marcus didn't care. Let them document it. Let it go viral. The more witnesses, the better. Gate 47 came into view. The jet bridge door was open, and through it, Marcus could see into the aircraft cabin. The plane was back at the gate, engines silent, passengers still on board. Through the windows he could see movement, people standing, gathering belongings, the confused energy of a flight that had started to leave and then mysteriously returned. Captain Hayes stood at the entrance to the jet bridge, talking to a gate agent with animated gestures. He saw the approaching group, and his expression shifted from irritation to confusion to something approaching alarm as he registered who was walking toward him. Arthur reached Hayes first. "Captain Hayes, step aside." Hayes's face had gone from alarm to blank incomprehension. He looked at Arthur, at the board members, at Director Bradford's FAA credentials, and finally at Marcus with his bandaged temple and blood-stained hoodie. "Arthur, what's going on?" "I filed a report about an uncooperative passenger. Security removed him. I don't understand why the flight was called back." "Step aside." Arthur's voice had gone cold, carrying authority Marcus hadn't heard from him before. Hayes moved, his body operating on automatic while his brain tried to catch up. Marcus walked past him onto the jet bridge, the rest of the group following. The tunnel was long enough that Marcus had time to feel his heart rate elevating, that familiar pre-combat adrenaline that came before difficult confrontations. He stepped through the aircraft door. The cabin erupted into shocked silence. Every passenger was staring. Jessica Williams stood in the galley, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Daniel Brooks was visible in the cockpit doorway, his face ashen. Gregory Blackwell was in seat 1A, Marcus's seat, with a champagne glass in his hand and an expression of confused entitlement. Marcus walked down the aisle slowly, giving every passenger time to see his face, the bandage, the blood. He stopped at the front of the first-class cabin and turned to face them all. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and clear and carried to every corner of the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Marcus Thompson. I am the founder and CEO of Aerotech Industries. As of 3 o'clock this morning, I am also the sole owner and chairman of Sky Elite Aviation. 45 minutes ago, I was forcibly removed from seat 1A of this aircraft, the seat I had paid $8,400 to occupy. I was removed because Captain Hayes wanted to give my seat to a personal friend. When I refused to comply with what was clearly a discriminatory order, I was dragged off this plane, handcuffed, and injured by airport security officers. The blood you see on my clothes is my own. The injury you see on my face happened when I was pulled from my seat. The cabin was absolutely silent except for the ambient noise of the aircraft systems. Gregory Blackwell had set down his champagne glass, his face draining of color. Marcus continued, his voice never rising but somehow filling the entire space. Captain Hayes, you are terminated effective immediately. Your employment with Sky Elite Aviation is ended. You will surrender your uniform and credentials to Mr. Morgan before leaving this aircraft. Hayes made a choking sound, something between protest and shock, but no words came out. Marcus turned his attention to Jessica. Miss Williams, you attempted to intervene when I was being assaulted. You tried to stop it. Thank you. Consider yourself promoted to Director of Cabin Services, effective immediately. You'll work directly with me to overhaul our crew training protocols. Jessica's tears were flowing freely now, but she managed to nod. Then Marcus's eyes found Gregory Blackwell, still seated in 1A, looking like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Mr. Blackwell, your Sky Elite Platinum membership is revoked. You are banned from this airline for life. Additionally, Aerotech Industries is liquidating its $340 million investment in Blackwell Capital, effective immediately. The morality clause in your fund's investor agreement covers assault of service workers and discrimination. Our legal team will be in contact with your board regarding the specific violations. Blackwell's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. The champagne glass tipped over in his lap, spilling across his expensive suit, but he didn't seem to notice. Marcus looked at Director Bradford. I want Captain Hayes' license suspended pending a full FAA investigation. I want the cockpit voice recorder preserved as evidence. And I want every complaint filed against this crew in the past 5 years reviewed by federal investigators. Bradford nodded, his expression grave, but something in his eyes suggesting satisfaction at finally being able to act on problems he'd likely suspected existed. Consider it done, Dr. Thompson. Marcus turned back to the cabin, addressing all the passengers who'd watched him be dragged away and done nothing. For those of you who recorded what happened, thank you. Your videos will be crucial evidence. For those who simply watched in silence, I want you to think about what your inaction cost. Not just me, but every person who's been treated this way on this airline and had no recourse because witnesses chose comfort over courage. He walked back toward the exit, every eye following him. As he passed Hayes, the captain finally found his voice. Dr. Thompson, please. I didn't know. If I had known who you were. And that is precisely the problem, Captain. If you had known who I was, you would have treated me with respect. But you saw a black man in casual clothes and decided I didn't belong. Your mistake wasn't misjudging my identity. Your mistake was believing that respect is something only certain people deserve. Hayes had no response to that. His face crumbled, the weight of what he'd done and what it would cost finally penetrating. Marcus walked off the aircraft, down the jet bridge, and into the terminal where airport security had cleared a space. The EMT who'd bandaged him earlier was waiting with ice packs. The board of directors clustered around him, their expressions ranging from shock to determination.
Doctor.
Thompson, what do you need from us? Marcus accepted an ice pack and pressed it gently against his temple, wincing at the cold pressure. I need every complaint filed against Sky Elite in the past 5 years pulled and reviewed. I need to know who else Hayes, his crew, and airport security treated this way. I need their names, their stories, and I need compensation packages prepared. Nobody should have to go through what I just did. And the only reason I'm standing here, able to demand accountability, is because I had the resources and power to fight back. Most passengers don't. So we're going to find every single person who is wronged, and we're going to make it right. One of the board members, an older woman with steel gray hair named Patricia Hoffman, stepped forward. We'll have the files on your desk by tomorrow morning, all 47 complaints that were settled quietly over the years. Marcus's jaw tightened. 47. The number was worse than he'd thought during due diligence. 47 people who'd been discriminated against, humiliated, or worse. 47 settlements paid to buy silence instead of fix problems. Starting today, that culture ends. No more quiet settlements, no more protecting bad actors because they're good pilots or have seniority. No more looking the other way when passengers are treated as less than because of how they look or where they come from. He pulled out his phone and checked the time. 7:43 a.m. The DoD contract signing was at 2 p.m. Pacific. If he could get on a flight within the next 2 hours, he'd make it. Arthur, get me on the next available flight to San Francisco. Any airline, any seat, and get our legal team on the phone. I want criminal charges filed against officers Cooper and Barnes for assault. I want civil rights violations documented, and I want every second of security footage from this morning preserved and copied to our attorneys. Already in process, sir. Director Bradford approached, his credentials in hand. Dr. Thompson, I'll need a formal statement for the FAA investigation. Can you come to our field office? Not today. I have a contract to sign in San Francisco that's worth $400 million to my company and critical to national defense. But I'll make time tomorrow, and I'll bring every piece of evidence we've collected. Bradford nodded with what looked like respect. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I've suspected Hayes had issues for years. But without passengers willing to push back officially, without evidence that could withstand legal scrutiny, my hands were tied. Thank you for not backing down. I didn't do this for gratitude. I did it because 47 other people deserved better and didn't get it. Now they will. Marcus excused himself and found a quiet corner near the gate. He pulled out his phone and called his mother. She answered on the first ring. Marcus, I thought you'd be in the air by now. Flight got delayed. Ended up being more eventful than expected. He could hear the suspicion in her voice. Eventful how? Long story. I'll tell you when I see you next week. But Mom, remember when you flew to my graduation and you were so worried someone would say you didn't belong in first class? Her silence was heavy with memory. I remember. That happened to me this morning. Captain saw me in my seat and decided I must have stolen the ticket or something. Had me removed by security. He heard her sharp intake of breath. Baby, are you all right? Did they hurt you? Nothing serious. Few bruises, small cut. I'm fine. But here's the thing. I own the airline now. Bought it last night. The captain who had me removed? He's fired. The security officers who roughed me up? They're facing charges. And every person who was treated that way in the past 5 years is going to get compensation and an apology. There was a long pause. When his mother spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. Your father would have been so proud. I know, Mom. I know. They talked for a few more minutes, Marcus downplaying his injuries, his mother asking questions he deflected with practiced ease. When he finally ended the call, he felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the early morning or the physical pain. He felt exhausted by the weight of knowing that what happened to him happened to people every day. People without resources, without power, without the ability to fight back. People who just had to swallow the humiliation and move on because the system was designed to protect itself, not them. But now, he had the power to change that system, and he intended to use every bit of it. Arthur appeared with a boarding pass. United flight to SFO, leaves in 90 minutes, first class seat. Already checked you in under your real name this time. Marcus took the pass and stood, his shoulder protesting the movement. Get Hayes and his crew to our attorneys for statements. Get Cooper and Barnes's personnel files. And Arthur, I need you to schedule a company-wide meeting for next week. Every employee, from pilots to baggage handlers. We're going to talk about exactly what kind of airline we're going to be going forward. Consider it done, sir. And Marcus, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I saw the complaints. I knew there were problems. I should have pushed harder to fix them. You're right, you should have. But you're going to help me fix them now. That's how you make it right. Arthur nodded, the burden of complicity settling visibly on his shoulders. Marcus walked toward the new gate, each step a reminder of the morning's events through the various aches and pains. But underneath the discomfort was something else. A cold, focused determination. Captain Hayes thought he was enforcing protocol. Gregory Blackwell thought he was claiming a privilege he'd earned through status. Officers Cooper and Barnes thought they were removing a problem passenger. What they'd actually done was provide Marcus with a masterclass in everything that needed to change. And more importantly, they'd given him all the evidence he needed to burn down the old system and build something better from the ashes. The revolution wasn't coming. It had already begun. The United flight touched down at San Francisco International at 1:47 p.m. Pacific Time, 13 minutes ahead of schedule. Marcus had spent the 5-hour journey in seat 2A with his laptop open, reviewing the Department of Defense contract for the 14th time, while simultaneously coordinating with his legal team via encrypted email. The ice pack the flight attendant had provided had reduced the swelling on his temple, but the bruise was blooming into spectacular shades of purple and yellow that no amount of bandaging could hide. The businessman in 2C had stared at him during boarding, clearly trying to place where he'd seen that face before. Marcus had watched the recognition dawn around the 2-hour mark when the man pulled out his phone and scrolled through what was probably Twitter or Instagram. The videos from JFK were already circulating. Trevor Johnson's footage had been posted within minutes of the plane returning to the gate, and the algorithm had done its work with ruthless efficiency. 3 million views in 6 hours, climbing to 8 million by the time Marcus's flight crossed into Nevada airspace. The businessman had tried to catch Marcus's eye after that, perhaps looking for confirmation or wanting to express some solidarity, but Marcus had kept his attention fixed on his screen. He didn't need sympathy from strangers. He needed signed contracts and systematic change. A black SUV waited on the tarmac, cleared through security by virtue of Marcus's DoD credentials and the urgency of the contract signing. His chief legal counsel, Patricia Reeves, sat in the back seat with her own laptop open and 3 thick folders spread across the middle seat. She was a white woman in her early 50s, Harvard Law, 15 years at the Justice Department before Marcus had poached her with a compensation package that made her eyes water. She looked up as he slid into the vehicle, and her professional composure cracked for exactly 2 seconds when she saw his face. Christ, Marcus. The videos don't do it justice. She handed him a folder without waiting for a response. Everything you need for the DoD signing. They've already been briefed on this morning's incident. General Patterson called personally to express concern and verify you'd still make the meeting. Marcus flipped through the documents, each page a carefully negotiated term that represented 18 months of Pentagon bureaucracy. And the criminal complaints? Filed 1 hour ago. NYPD has issued arrest warrants for officers Cooper and Barnes on charges of assault and battery. They're also investigating Hayes for filing a false report and conspiracy. The TSA has opened an internal investigation into Cooper and Barnes, but given the video evidence and your testimony, termination is virtually certain. Not good enough. I want civil rights violations added, federal charges. Patricia pulled out another folder, this one marked with red tabs indicating urgent priority. Already in motion, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York is reviewing for potential prosecution under Title VI. Your status as the airline owner creates an interesting wrinkle. They assaulted not just a passenger, but the chairman of a federally regulated carrier. That elevates it. The SUV pulled away from the aircraft, weaving through the maze of service roads toward the airport exit. Marcus checked his watch. 1:52 p.m. The Presidio was a 20-minute drive in light traffic, 40 in heavy. They had cushion, but not much. What about the other victims? The 47 complaints? Patricia's expression hardened in a way Marcus had learned to recognize as her pre-litigation face. Arthur delivered the files this morning. I've had 3 associates reviewing them. Marcus, it's worse than we thought. The 47 number only counts formal complaints that reached settlement stage. There are at least 73 additional incidents documented in internal memos, email exchanges, and crew reports that never made it to official complaint status. Most were dismissed as misunderstandings, or the passengers were offered minor compensation, like vouchers, to prevent escalation. How many total victims? 120. That we can document with hard evidence. God knows how many more just swallowed it and moved on. Marcus felt that cold clarity settle over him again. The same sensation from the holding room at JFK. Numbers became people in his mind. 120 individuals who'd experienced some version of what he'd gone through that morning. Some probably worse, since they'd lacked the resources or knowledge to push back effectively. I want every single one of them contacted. Personal letters, not form emails. Apology from me directly. Offer of compensation calculated by severity of incident. And I want their stories documented for the FAA investigation. Already drafting the letters. But Marcus, the compensation package you're proposing is going to cost approximately $14 million. Then we spend $14 million. We also announce publicly that we're doing it. No NDAs, no silence requirements. If victims want to speak to the press, they can. If they want to testify at Hayes' trial, we'll fly them there and put them up in hotels. Total transparency. The SUV merged onto Highway 101, traffic moving smoothly for once. Through the window, San Francisco skyline emerged from the afternoon haze. The Trans-America Pyramid and Salesforce Tower, marking the financial district where Marcus had first pitched Aerotech to skeptical venture capitalists 17 years ago. Patricia was typing rapidly on her laptop. The board is requesting an emergency meeting, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. They want to discuss the financial implications and PR strategy. Tell them 9 a.m. I need to stop by the FAA office first to give my formal statement to Bradford. And Patricia, make sure every board member understands that the financial implications are non-negotiable. We're paying the victims what they're owed. Anyone who has a problem with that can resign. Understood? Also, the press is requesting comment. We've got interview requests from CNN, NBC, The Times, The Post, and about 40 other outlets. No interviews until after the DOD signing. Then we'll schedule a press conference for tomorrow afternoon. I want to control the narrative, not react to it. Smart. And one more thing. Gregory Blackwell's attorneys called. They're requesting a meeting to discuss the investment withdrawal. They're claiming the morality clause doesn't apply because Blackwell wasn't convicted of any crime. Marcus allowed himself a thin smile that pulled at his temple wound. Tell them to review the clause more carefully. It specifies credible allegations, not convictions. And we have video evidence of him demanding my seat while knowing I was being forcibly removed. That's complicity and discrimination at minimum. The $340 million gets liquidated as scheduled. If they want to sue, they can join the line. The Presidio came into view, that historic military post turned national park, its Spanish colonial buildings nestled among cypress and eucalyptus trees, with views of the Golden Gate Bridge. The DOD had chosen this location deliberately, Marcus suspected, as a reminder of military tradition and the seriousness of the contracts they administered. Security at the gate was thorough. Credentials checked, vehicles searched, Marcus's briefcase X-rayed, despite his clearance level. The guard who processed them glanced at Marcus's bandaged temple with professional neutrality, asking no questions, but clearly noting the injury in his log. They were directed to Building 640, a renovated warehouse that now housed the Defense Innovation Unit. General Clayton Patterson waited in the conference room, a man in his early 60s with the bearing of someone who'd spent 40 years in uniform and retired with more stars than most officers saw in a lifetime. He was flanked by 2 DoD attorneys, a contracting officer, and a technical specialist Marcus recognized from previous negotiations. Patterson stood when Marcus entered, his eyes going immediately to the bandage and bruise. "Dr. Thompson, I saw the videos. Are you all right?" "I'll heal, General. Thank you for your concern." Patterson gestured to the empty chairs across the conference table. "I won't pretend to understand the full circumstances, but I want you to know that the department takes allegations of discrimination very seriously. If there's anything we can do to support the investigation, your support is appreciated, but right now, I'm more interested in ensuring this contract gets signed. Our battery systems are ready for deployment. Your drones need them. Let's get this done." The general smiled slightly, a gesture of respect for Marcus's focus. "Agreed. Shall we begin?" The next 90 minutes were a masterclass in bureaucratic precision. Each clause of the 247-page contract was reviewed aloud, questions answered, technical specifications confirmed. The battery systems Aerotech had developed would power the next generation of long-range surveillance drones, units capable of staying airborne for 72 hours on a single charge. The military applications were obvious, but Marcus had insisted on dual-use provisions that would allow the technology to eventually transition to civilian markets. Cargo drones, agricultural monitoring, disaster response. At 3:43 p.m., General Patterson signed the final page. The contracting officer witnessed. Marcus added his signature below. And just like that, $400 million in government contracts became reality. Patterson shook his hand with genuine warmth. "Congratulations, Dr. Thompson. This technology is going to save lives. Both military personnel who won't need to fly dangerous missions and civilians who will benefit when this eventually goes commercial. That's always been the goal, General. Technology should serve people, not the other way around." The general's expression shifted, becoming more personal. "I served with a lot of men over the years who looked like you. Good men. Brilliant men, who had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. What you're doing with Sky Elite, holding people accountable, that matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I don't intend to." Marcus and Patricia drove back to Aerotech headquarters in silence, both processing the day's events. The office was a converted warehouse in the Mission District, all exposed brick and industrial steel beams, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out toward the bay. His executive team was waiting in the main conference room. CFO Janet Morrison, CTO David Kim, VP of Operations Michael Rodriguez, and Head of HR Linda Chen. They stood when Marcus entered, their expressions ranging from concern to barely suppressed fury on his behalf. Janet was the first to speak. "We saw the videos. Every single employee has seen them by now. There are people downstairs asking if they should organize protests at Sky Elite facilities." Marcus set his briefcase on the table and remained standing, too wired to sit, despite the exhaustion creeping through his bones. "No protests. We're going to handle this through legal channels and systematic reform. But I need everyone in this room to understand something. What happened to me this morning is not unique. It's not an isolated incident of one bad captain or 2 overzealous security officers. It's a symptom of a culture that Sky Elite allowed to fester for years. And now we're going to burn that culture to the ground and rebuild from scratch." David leaned forward, his engineer's mind already working through the logistics. "What do you need from us?" Marcus pulled out his laptop and connected it to the conference room display. The screen filled with a spreadsheet Patricia had compiled. 120 names, dates, incident descriptions, settlement amounts. This is everyone we can document who was discriminated against by Sky Elite in the past 5 years. I want personal apology letters drafted to each of them. I want compensation packages that actually reflect the harm done, not the minimum amount to make them go away. And I want a public announcement that we're doing this, so other victims we haven't identified yet know they can come forward. Linda, the HR director, was scrolling through the list on her own tablet, her face growing more strained with each entry. Marcus, some of these incidents describe behavior that should have resulted in immediate termination. How did this many complaints get swept under the rug? That's exactly what I intend to find out. Linda, I need you to review Sky Elite's entire HR department. Every person who signed off on these settlements, every supervisor who dismissed complaints, every executive who knew about the pattern and did nothing. Anyone who was complicit goes. I don't care about seniority or expertise. We're cleaning house. Janet, ever the pragmatist, pulled up financial models. The compensation package will cost approximately $14 million. The terminations and hiring of replacements will add another $8 million in severance, recruiting, and training costs. We're looking at a $22 million hit to the acquisition's first-year financials. Worth every penny. Sky Elite has been profitable for years by cutting corners on basic human dignity. That ends now. I'd rather run a smaller airline that treats people right than a large one that doesn't. Michael, the operations VP, raised a concern Marcus had been expecting. What about the other pilots? Sky Elite has 48 captains on staff. Hayes was clearly the worst, but if the culture was this toxic, there are probably others with similar attitudes who've just been better at hiding it. Every captain gets reviewed. Flight records, passenger complaints, crew feedback. Anyone with a pattern of incidents gets suspended pending investigation. We'll need to hire external auditors to ensure objectivity. And we're implementing new training requirements: implicit bias, de-escalation, federal regulations on discrimination. Mandatory, no exceptions. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, Marcus's team working through the massive task of reforming an entire company's culture, while he sat at the head of the table, his temple throbbing with each heartbeat. By 6 p.m., they had an action plan. Immediate terminations of the most egregious offenders, compensation packages drafted for victims, new training protocols designed, and a press conference scheduled for the following afternoon. Marcus finally allowed himself to go home, a converted firehouse in Pacific Heights that he'd purchased 3 years ago when Aerotech's valuation had crossed the $1 billion threshold. The space was modern minimalist. Concrete floors, white walls, furniture that was more sculpture than comfort. He dropped his briefcase by the door, grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator, and collapsed onto the sofa. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Just watch the news. Call me when you can." He dialed her number, too tired to type. "Hi, Mom. Baby, I saw what they did to you. I saw the videos. That cut on your head, those marks on your wrists." Her voice was shaking with a mother's fury, the kind that transcends any fear or propriety. "I'm okay. It looks worse than it is." "Don't you lie to me, Marcus Thompson. I raised you better than that." He smiled despite the pain in his temple. "All right, it hurts. But I've had worse injuries playing basketball in high school. Remember when I broke my nose sophomore year? That was different. That was an accident. This was deliberate. They hurt you because of how you look." "I know. And that's why I'm making sure it never happens to anyone else on my airline." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted from anger to something deeper. "Your father and I, we spent our whole lives trying to make ourselves small, trying not to stand out, not to make waves, not to give anyone a reason to notice us. We thought that's how you survived. And here you are, buying airlines and challenging generals and refusing to accept being treated as less than. I'm so proud of you I could burst. Dad would have told me I was being reckless, that I should have just moved seats and avoided the whole confrontation. Maybe, but he also would have understood why you didn't. Your father was a quiet man, but he had fire inside. He just never had the opportunity to let it out. You're living the life he wanted, but never got to have. They talked for another 30 minutes, Marcus downplaying the severity of the morning's events, while his mother extracted the truth through a combination of direct questions and maternal intuition. When he finally hung up, it was past 7 p.m., and his stomach was reminding him he hadn't eaten since the protein bar on the morning flight. He ordered Thai food from a place down the street and ate it standing at his kitchen counter, scrolling through the news coverage on his phone. The story had metastasized beyond aviation circles into the mainstream. CNN was running it as their lead story. The Times had published a 2,000-word analysis of discrimination in luxury travel, and social media was ablaze with hashtags demanding justice. Trevor Johnson, the kid who'd recorded the video, had been interviewed by multiple outlets. His account was consistent and damning. He'd watched security drag Marcus from the plane while Captain Hayes stood by looking satisfied. Watched Gregory Blackwell take the seat without a second thought. Watched the other passengers film, but not intervene. The most interesting development came from an unlikely source. Other Sky Elite passengers were coming forward with their own stories. A black woman named Dr. Michelle Anderson had posted on Twitter about being denied her first-class meal 2 years ago, and instead being given what the flight attendant called soul food, without asking if that's what she wanted. A reverend named Isaiah Washington described being moved from his seat for praying too loudly, though white passengers had been talking at normal volume without issue. The stories kept coming, each one adding another layer of evidence to the systematic pattern. Marcus's phone rang at 8:17 p.m. Unknown number, but the area code was New York. He answered. "Dr. Thompson? This is Officer Dale Cooper, from this morning." The voice was hesitant, unsure, nothing like the aggressive authority from JFK. "Officer Cooper, I'm surprised to hear from you." "Sir, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. I know what I did was wrong. But I wanted you to know that I've been placed on unpaid suspension, and I expect I'll be terminated within the week. I also wanted you to know that I've agreed to testify. Against Hayes, against Barnes, against the whole system that made me think what I did was acceptable." Marcus leaned against the counter, processing this unexpected development. "Why the change of heart, Officer Cooper?" "I went home this morning and my daughter, she's 7, asked me what I did at work. And I realized I couldn't tell her. I couldn't look her in the eye and explain that I'd handcuffed a man who wasn't resisting, who'd offered to leave voluntarily, and then let my partner slam his head into an armrest hard enough to make him bleed. I couldn't explain that I did it because my supervisor was watching, and I wanted to look tough. Because when I strip away all the justifications, that's what it was. Performance. Theater. Showing everyone I was in control. And now? Now I'm losing my job and probably facing criminal charges. And that's exactly what I deserve. But I wanted you to know that I'm going to make sure everyone understands what happened. Hayes set it in motion, but Barnes and I carried it out. We're responsible for our actions, and I'm going to own that." Marcus was quiet for a moment, weighing whether this was genuine remorse or a play for leniency. "Officer Cooper, I appreciate you calling, but understand that my forgiveness isn't what matters here. What matters is that you help ensure the system that enabled your behavior gets reformed. Testify honestly, hold nothing back. Help us identify other officers who've done similar things. That's how you make it right." "I will, sir. Thank you for taking my call." The line went dead. Marcus set his phone down and stared at it for a long moment. Redemption was complicated. Cooper had assaulted him, had caused him physical injury, had participated in his humiliation. But Cooper was also now willing to burn down the system he'd been part of. That had value. The next morning came too early, Marcus's alarm dragging him from restless sleep at 5:30 a.m. His temple had developed a spectacular bruise overnight, purple and yellow spreading down toward his cheekbone. The butterfly bandages were holding, but the wound beneath was definitely going to scar. He took a long shower, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than some people's monthly rent, and drove to the FAA's regional office in Millbrae. Director Bradford was waiting with 2 investigators and a court reporter. They spent 3 hours going through every detail of the morning at JFK: the check-in, the security screening, the lounge, the confrontation with Hayes, the assault by Cooper and Barnes. Marcus's testimony was precise, factual, unemotional. He provided timestamps, quoted conversations verbatim, identified every witness by name and seat number. The investigators asked clarifying questions, challenged his recollection on minor details, verified his account against the security footage they'd already obtained. At the end, Bradford sat back with an expression of grim satisfaction. "Dr. Thompson, I've been investigating aviation incidents for 23 years. This is the most thoroughly documented case of discrimination I've ever seen. Between your testimony, the video evidence, the passenger statements, and the pattern of previous complaints, we have everything we need to pursue license revocation for Hayes and significant fines against SkyElite's previous ownership for failing to address the systematic issues. What about criminal charges? That's up to the U.S. Attorney, but I'll be recommending prosecution for Hayes under federal civil rights statutes. What he did wasn't just bad judgment, it was a deliberate abuse of authority with racial animus as the clear motive." Marcus stood, extending his hand. "Thank you, Director. Please keep me updated on the investigation's progress. You'll be the first call when we have developments." The board meeting at SkyElite's corporate offices started at 9 a.m. sharp. Marcus walked into the conference room to find 12 board members already seated, their expressions ranging from supportive to openly hostile. Arthur sat at one end, looking like he hadn't slept, which he probably hadn't given the volume of crisis management required over the past 24 hours. Patricia Hoffman, the steel-haired board member who'd promised to deliver the complaint files, stood when Marcus entered. "Dr. Thompson, before we begin, I want to apologize on behalf of this board. We should have addressed the cultural issues years ago. We saw the complaints. We knew about the settlements. We told ourselves it was a few bad apples rather than a systematic rot. That was cowardice, and I'm ashamed." Her honesty disarmed what Marcus had expected to be a contentious meeting. Several other board members nodded in agreement, though a few remained stone-faced. One of them, a man in his 60s named Robert Sullivan, spoke up with barely concealed antagonism. "Dr. Thompson, while we all sympathize with what happened to you, this board has a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. The compensation packages you're proposing will cost $14 million. The terminations and restructuring will cost millions more. And you're doing all this during a media firestorm that's already caused our customer bookings to drop 23% in the past 24 hours. At what point does your personal vendetta stop and sound business management begin?" Marcus walked slowly to the head of the table, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent room. He set his briefcase down with deliberate care and looked directly at Sullivan. "Mr. Sullivan, let me clarify something. This isn't a vendetta. This is an ethical and legal obligation. The previous ownership of this company violated federal civil rights laws repeatedly over a 5-year period. They created a hostile environment where discrimination was tolerated and victims were silenced with money. That exposed SkyElite to massive legal liability. The $14 million I'm spending on compensation is a fraction of what we'd pay if all 120 victims filed individual lawsuits and won, which they would, because the evidence is overwhelming." Sullivan's face reddened, but Marcus wasn't finished. "As for the booking drop, that's temporary. Right now, we're a story about discrimination and violence. In 6 months, we'll be a story about accountability and reform. We'll be the airline that didn't just apologize, but actually changed. That has value in the marketplace that your quarterly spreadsheets can't quantify. And if you can't see that, Mr. Sullivan, then perhaps you're not the right person to be on this board going forward." The room went absolutely silent. Sullivan opened his mouth, closed it, and finally stood. "I resign, effective immediately. I didn't invest in this company to watch it get destroyed by political correctness and virtue signaling." He grabbed his briefcase and walked out, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Patricia Hoffman broke the silence. "Anyone else?" No one moved. After a long moment, she continued. Good. Then let's get to work rebuilding this airline the right way. The rest of the meeting was productive. They reviewed the compensation packages victim by victim, adjusted amounts based on severity and long-term impact, approved the termination list that included not just Hayes, but 7 other employees with documented histories of discriminatory behavior. They discussed the new training programs, the external audits, the transparency initiatives. By noon, Marcus had what he needed: unanimous board support for the reforms, a $30 million budget for the overhaul, and a clear mandate to transform Sky Elite's culture from top to bottom. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Fairmont Hotel downtown. Marcus arrived 30 minutes early to find the ballroom already packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Patricia Reeves had prepared talking points, but Marcus set them aside. This needed to be authentic, not scripted. He took the podium at exactly 2 p.m., the room falling silent as cameras focused on his bruised face. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Marcus Thompson. 48 hours ago, I purchased Sky Elite Aviation. 24 hours ago, I was forcibly removed from one of my own aircraft because the captain decided a black man in casual clothing didn't belong in first class. You've seen the videos. You know what happened. So I'm not here to rehash the incident. I'm here to tell you what happens next. He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. Yesterday, I learned that what happened to me wasn't unique. Over the past 5 years, Sky Elite employees discriminated against at least 120 passengers in documented incidents. Those passengers were moved, denied service, had their tickets questioned, or were removed from aircraft. In every case, the discrimination was based on race, perceived socioeconomic status, or other protected characteristics. In every case, Sky Elite's response was to pay them off quietly and do nothing to address the underlying culture that made such behavior acceptable. The reporters were scribbling furiously, cameras zoomed tight on his face. That ends today. I am personally writing to each of those 120 victims with an apology and an offer of compensation that actually reflects the harm done to them. We are implementing mandatory training on implicit bias and federal civil rights law for every employee. We are firing anyone with a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior, regardless of their position or seniority. And we are establishing an independent oversight board to review any future complaints and ensure they are handled appropriately. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Dr. Thompson, critics are saying this is a publicity stunt, that you're using your personal incident to generate positive press for a struggling airline. Marcus met her eyes directly. Sky Elite isn't struggling. It's profitable. It serves a wealthy clientele who value luxury and exclusivity. The problem is that for too long, exclusivity was coded language for keeping certain people out. What I'm doing isn't a publicity stunt. It's a legal and moral obligation. And if there are executives or board members who think protecting civil rights is just good PR, then they fundamentally misunderstand both the law and basic human dignity. Another reporter stood. What about Captain Hayes? Will you be pressing charges? Criminal charges have already been filed by the NYPD. The FAA is pursuing license revocation, and yes, I will be pursuing civil litigation for assault, battery, and deprivation of civil rights. But more importantly, I'm pursuing systematic change, so no future passenger on my airline has to experience what I or the other 120 victims experienced. The questions continued for 40 minutes about the compensation amounts, the employee terminations, the impact on the airline's brand, the timeline for reforms. Marcus answered each one directly, refusing to dodge or obfuscate. Finally, a young black reporter in the back raised her hand. Dr. Thompson, you could have revealed your identity immediately and avoided being dragged off that plane. Why didn't you? Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because if I'd revealed who I was right away, Captain Hayes would have learned that he misjudged one specific passenger's power. He wouldn't have learned that his behavior itself was wrong. He would have been more careful about who he discriminated against. but he would have continued discriminating. By letting it play out, by letting him commit fully to his course of action, I ensured there would be witnesses, documentation, evidence of the systematic nature of the problem. Sometimes you have to let people show you who they really are before you can hold them accountable for it. The room erupted in follow-up questions, but Marcus stepped back from the podium. That's all I have time for today. Thank you. Patricia guided him out through a side exit where another SUV waited. As they pulled away from the hotel, she showed him her tablet. The press conference is already trending. You've got 40,000 new followers on Twitter in the past hour. The compensation announcement is being praised by civil rights groups. Even the business press is calling it bold. Marcus closed his eyes, exhaustion finally catching up to him. I don't care about trending or followers or press coverage. I care about making sure this never happens again. I know, but public support matters. It gives you leverage when the inevitable backlash comes. What backlash? Patricia pulled up several articles that had been published in the past hour. Conservative commentators calling him a race baiter, airline industry analysts warning that his reforms would bankrupt Sky Elite, anonymous internet trolls threatening violence. There it is, right on schedule. Marcus read through the articles without emotion. He'd known this was coming. Anytime someone challenged entrenched power structures, there was backlash from those who benefited from the status quo. Ignore all of it. We move forward with the plan, regardless of what critics say. The SUV dropped him at Aerotech headquarters, where his executive team was waiting with updates. The DoD contract had been officially processed. The first payment of $85 million had hit their accounts, and production was being ramped up to meet the aggressive delivery schedule. But his team had also compiled a different kind of report. Preliminary results from the Sky Elite employee interviews. David pulled up a presentation on the main screen. We've interviewed 43 Sky Elite employees so far. Pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, maintenance crew. The pattern is clear. Everyone knew about the discrimination. Some participated actively, some looked the other way. Some tried to push back and were told to mind their own business. But everyone knew. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. How many tried to push back? 11. All of them filed internal complaints or incident reports. All of those complaints were dismissed by middle management. 3 of the 11 quit because they couldn't stand working in that environment anymore. I want those 3 contacted immediately. Offer them their jobs back with raises and promotions. They showed integrity when it cost them something. That's exactly who we need building the new culture. Already done. 2 have accepted. The 3rd moved to Denver and is happy at United, but she appreciated the offer. The meetings continued through the evening. Marcus's team working through the massive task of transforming an airline while simultaneously managing a growing technology company. By 9 p.m., he called it and went home, stopping at a small Vietnamese restaurant on the way to pick up pho that he ate in his car because he was too tired to wait until he got home. His phone buzzed with a text from Arthur. Hayes hired a lawyer. Big firm. They're preparing a wrongful termination suit. Marcus typed back, "Let them sue. Discovery will be fascinating." Another text came through, this one from Trevor Johnson, the kid who'd recorded the video. "Dr. Thompson, thank you for fighting back. My mom was on a flight 3 years ago where they made her move because her ticket looked fake. It was real, but they didn't believe her. She never filed a complaint because she thought nobody would care. You showed people do care." Marcus stared at that message for a long time, something tight and painful lodging in his chest. Trevor's mother was probably one of the 73 undocumented incidents Patricia had found. Someone who'd been wronged, but hadn't had the resources or confidence to fight back. He typed a response. "What's your mother's name? I want to make sure she's on the compensation list." Angela Johnson. The flight was Sky Elite 445, Atlanta to New York, March 2022. Marcus forwarded the information to Patricia with instructions to track down the details and ensure Mrs. Johnson received compensation even though she'd never filed formal complaint. These were the ones that kept him going. The Angela Johnsons who'd been hurt and told themselves nobody cared. He was going to show them that someone did care, that their dignity mattered, that the system could be forced to change if you pushed hard enough and refused to accept injustice as inevitable. The next morning brought news that Jake Barnes, the second TSA officer, had been arrested at his home in Queens. Cooper had surrendered voluntarily the day before and posted bail. Hayes was fighting the criminal charges through his attorney, claiming he'd acted within his authority as captain and had no discriminatory intent. The FAA investigation was moving faster than usual, Bradford having prioritized it, given the public attention and clear evidence. The preliminary report was damning. Hayes had a history of complaints that had been dismissed by Sky Elite's previous management, a pattern of treating minority passengers differently than white passengers, and had specifically lied about the weight and balance issue in his incident report. Marcus's legal team estimated Hayes would lose his license permanently within 6 months. The criminal trial would take longer, probably 18 months, but the outcome seemed increasingly certain. What surprised Marcus was the call he received at 10 a.m. from Gregory Blackwell. "Dr. Thompson, I owe you an apology." The voice was subdued, nothing like the entitled bluster from the aircraft. "Go on." "I've had time to think about what happened. To really think about it. I saw you sitting there and I assumed you didn't belong. I made that assumption based on nothing but how you looked. And when Hayes offered me your seat, I took it without question because I thought it was my right. I was wrong. Deeply, shamefully wrong." Marcus waited, saying nothing. "I know you've pulled your investment from my fund. I know I'm banned from Sky Elite. I deserve both of those consequences. But I wanted you to know that I've started therapy to address my biases, and I've made a donation to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in your name. $500,000. It's not enough to make up for what I did, but it's a start. Mr. Blackwell, I appreciate the call, but understand that your redemption isn't my responsibility. The donation is good. The therapy is good. What would be better is if you used your platform as a financial executive to push for diversity and accountability in your industry. Turn your shame into action that helps other people." "I will. Thank you for taking my call." The line went dead. Marcus sat back in his chair, processing this unexpected development. Blackwell's contrition seemed genuine, though whether it came from actual moral growth or fear of further consequences was impossible to know. Either way, if it resulted in real change in how he treated people, it was worth something. The calendar reminder popped up on his screen. 120 victims needed letters. Marcus opened a blank document and began to type, personalizing each one, acknowledging the specific harm done, offering compensation, and the opportunity to tell their stories publicly if they chose. By the end of the day, all 120 letters had been sent. By the end of the week, 93 had responded, accepting the compensation. 41 wanted to share their stories with the press. 16 wanted to testify at Hayes' trial. The revolution Marcus had started on that airplane was spreading beyond anything he'd initially imagined. Other airlines were reviewing their discrimination policies. Unions were demanding better training. Congress was holding hearings on civil rights in commercial aviation. And through it all, Marcus kept returning to one thought. Dignity isn't a privilege to be earned. It's a right to be protected. And when systems fail to protect it, those systems have to burn.